Elias Varga hadn't set foot on a public dock in over a decade. Back then, he'd been elbow-deep in engine grease, patching hulls with fiberglass and duct tape, dreaming of a company that treated both boats and people right. Now he owned one of the largest leisure marine groups on the East Coast, but somewhere along the way, he'd traded wrenches for spreadsheets and forgotten what salt air really smelled like. Lately, though, something didn't add up. His team kept sending reports about the Port Haven Marina, a modest rental spot tucked between fishing charters and weekend sailboats, showing steady losses quarter after quarter. At first, Elias assumed it was seasonal. Then he noticed the same pattern for 3 straight quarters. Equipment costs were sky high. Staffing levels looked healthy on paper, yet customer complaints were rising, and repeat bookings had dropped like a stone. Most CEOs would have fired the local manager or sent in a consultant. But Elias remembered how he'd started, fixing outboard motors in his uncle's garage, living on instant noodles and hope. He knew numbers could lie. People told the truth if you listened close enough, so he did something reckless. He shaved off his neatly trimmed beard, let his hair grow out a bit, swapped his tailored shirts for a faded flannel, and bought a pair of scuffed work boots from a thrift store. He created a simple resume under the name Leo, listing generic handyman experience and a fake address in a nearby town. No fancy degrees, no corporate jargon, just a guy who knew his way around a toolbox. He drove his oldest car, a dented sedan with peeling paint, to Port Haven under gray skies. The marina wasn't what he remembered. The dock sagged in places. Paint peeled off the rental office. A few boats bobbed listlessly at their slips, their hulls streaked with grime. One had a tarp flapping loose in the wind like a surrender flag. Inside the office, a man in a too-tight polo shirt sat behind a cluttered desk, scrolling on his phone. He barely looked up when Elias walked in. "Help you?" the man asked, not sounding like he meant it. "Saw the now hiring sign," Elias said, keeping his voice low and rough like someone used to shouting over engine noise. "Handyman work, maintenance, whatever you need." The man, name tag read Dale, finally glanced up. His eyes narrowed slightly, then relaxed when he saw Elias's worn clothes and calloused hands. "You got experience with outboards?" "Yep, 2-stroke, 4-stroke carburetors, fuel lines. I've rebuilt more than I can count." Dale nodded slowly, then pulled out a clipboard. "We're short-staffed. Pays minimum plus tips if customers are feeling generous, which they usually aren't. You start today if you want." Elias didn't flinch. "I'll take it." He was handed a faded orange vest, a key to a storage shed full of mismatched tools, and a list of boats due for routine checks. No orientation. No safety briefing. Just go. Out on the dock, the wind carried the sharp tang of seaweed and diesel. Elias, now Leo, walked past rows of idle boats until he spotted someone actually working. A young man, maybe early 20s, knelt beside a center console, his arms deep inside the engine cowling. His t-shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool breeze, and his jeans had more patches than fabric. Without looking up, the kid said, "If you're here to help, grab the Torx wrench. If you're here to watch, stand downwind." Elias smiled faintly. "Torque wrench it is." He found the tool and handed it over. The young man finally glanced up. Tired eyes, sunburnt nose, but sharp and focused. "Thanks. Name's Kieran." "Leo," Elias replied. Kieran wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. "You're the new guy Dale mentioned? Hope you don't mind long days. We're kinda short-handed." "Just you?" Elias asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Kieran let out a dry laugh. "Officially? There's supposed to be 3 of us. Unofficially? Yeah, just me." He went back to tightening a bolt, his movements quick and precise. "Dale says the others are on rotation or handling admin, but I haven't seen them in months. Payroll still shows their names, though. Weird, right?" Elias didn't answer. He watched as Kieran finished the engine check, started the motor. It sputtered once, then roared to life and jotted something in a water-stained notebook. Then, without pause, he moved to the next boat, limping slightly on a twisted ankle wrapped in athletic tape. "You hurt yourself?" Elias asked. "Slipped on a wet deck yesterday," Kieran said, shrugging. "Didn't have time to sit. Got 6 charters today, and half these boats haven't been serviced in weeks. If I don't get them running, customers cancel. And if they cancel, Dale blames me." Elias felt a knot form in his stomach. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was neglect. And Kieran, exhausted and underpaid, was holding the whole operation together with sheer willpower. Over the next few hours, Elias followed Kieran's rhythm. Fuel tanks filled, bilge pumps tested, life jackets counted and repacked. Kieran answered customer questions with patience, even when they complained about minor scratches or slow Wi-Fi on the boats. He smiled when he didn't feel like it. He apologized for things that weren't his fault. At lunch, they sat on an overturned bucket near the fuel dock, eating sandwiches from a paper bag. Kieran didn't say much. He just stared out at the water, chewing slowly, like even his jaw was tired. "You always work this hard?" Elias asked gently. Kieran gave a half-smile. "Only way to keep things from falling apart. My dad used to say a boat don't care how tired you are, it'll sink just the same. So, I keep going." Elias thought about his own father, who'd taught him to respect machines because they reflected the care you put into them. He'd built his company on that idea. But somewhere between board meetings and quarterly targets, he'd let it slip. That afternoon, a customer arrived furious. His rented pontoon had stalled halfway across the bay. Kieran didn't argue. He grabbed a toolkit, hopped in a skiff, and motored out to tow it back. Elias went with him. On the water, away from the noise of the marina, Kieran finally let his guard down. "I applied here because I needed something steady. My old man's boatyard shut down last year. Medical bills. You know how it is." Elias nodded, though he didn't. Not really. His life had been cushioned by success for too long. Back at the dock, Kieran spent 2 hours diagnosing a faulty ignition switch, improvising a fix with spare parts from a junked engine. By sunset, his hands were raw, his voice hoarse from shouting over motors and his eyes heavy with fatigue. Yet when a late booking family showed up, he greeted them like old friends, helped them load coolers, and gave their kids life jackets that actually fit. As the last boat pulled away, Kieran slumped against the dock post, staring at the horizon. "Another day, another miracle," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Elias stood a few feet away, silent. He'd come to investigate losses. Instead, he'd found something far more valuable and far more broken. That night, back in his cheap motel room, Elias didn't open his laptop. He didn't check emails or call headquarters. He just sat by the window, listening to the distant lap of waves, thinking about a young man who worked like his life depended on it, while the system around him quietly stole his effort, his time, and his dignity. And for the first time in years, Elias Varga felt ashamed. He hadn't just lost touch with his business. He'd lost touch with the people who kept it alive. Tomorrow, he told himself, things would start to change, but not as the CEO, not yet. For now, he'd stay Leo, the quiet handyman who listened, watched, and remembered what really mattered. Because sometimes the truth isn't in the balance sheet. It's in the calluses on a young man's hands and the quiet pride in his voice when he says, "She'll run fine now." By the third morning, Leo had settled into the rhythm of the marina, not because it was smooth, but because it was relentless. The sun hadn't even crested the horizon when Kieran was already on the dock, flashlight in hand, checking battery terminals on a fishing skiff that had been acting up. His movements were automatic, like his body knew what to do even when his mind was running on fumes. Leo offered to help, and Kieran didn't refuse. There was no pride in his silence, just exhaustion, and maybe a flicker of relief that someone was finally sharing the load, even if just for a day. As they worked side by side, Leo noticed things. The way Kieran's hands trembled slightly when he unscrewed a stubborn fuel filter, not from weakness but from hours of gripping wrenches the day before. The way he winced every time he bent down, favoring that taped-up ankle. The way he kept glancing at his phone, not out of distraction but hope, like he was waiting for news he both wanted and dreaded. "You got someone waiting on you?" Leo asked casually, handing him a clean rag. Kieran hesitated, then nodded. "My sister. She's got finals this week. I promised I'd send her some cash for books." He paused, then added quietly, "She doesn't know how tight things are here." Leo didn't press. He just nodded and went back to tightening a loose hose clamp, but inside, the weight of that sentence settled deep. This wasn't just a job for Kieran. It was a lifeline, for him, for his family. By mid-morning, the marina buzzed with weekend renters, families with sun hats and coolers, couples laughing over maps, teenagers trying to look cool in sunglasses 2 sizes too big. None of them saw the frantic scramble happening behind the scenes. They didn't see Kieran sprint from boat to boat, resetting tripped breakers, topping off oil, replacing a missing fire extinguisher with one borrowed from the storage shed. They didn't see him duck into the office to print last-minute waivers because the printer had jammed. Again. And Dale was nowhere to be found. Leo watched Dale stroll in around 10, coffee in hand, phone pressed to his ear. He laughed loudly about a golf game, signed a clipboard without reading it, and disappeared into his office, closing the door behind him. Kieran didn't even look up. He just kept working. At lunch, they sat on the same overturned bucket. Kieran unwrapped a sandwich that looked like it had been made the night before. Bread slightly stale, lettuce wilted. He ate slowly, methodically, like he was rationing energy. "You ever get a day off?" Leo asked. Kieran snorted. "Last one was, I think in March, maybe April. Hard to keep track when every day feels the same." He took a sip from a dented water bottle. "Dale says we're understaffed, so I cover everything. Maintenance, check-ins, safety briefings, even cleaning the head after some guy clogged it with paper towels." He shook his head, not angry, just tired. "I don't mind the work. I grew up around boats, but it's like no one sees you're drowning, you know? They just keep handing you more buckets to carry." Leo felt a familiar ache in his chest. He'd built a company on the idea that good work should be seen, valued, rewarded. But here, right under his own brand's name, a young man was being erased by neglect. That afternoon, a woman approached, holding a toddler on her hip. "Excuse me, our boat's making this weird noise." "Like a grinding sound?" Kieran stood immediately. "Which slip?" "Number 7, the blue one." He nodded, already walking. Leo followed. At slip 7, the rental pontoon's engine was indeed grinding, a low, ugly groan that meant serious trouble. Kieran popped the cowling, peered inside, and sighed. "Water in the lower unit. Probably a cracked seal. It's been like this for days. I flagged it last week, but Dale said, just tell him it's fine, it's just the sound of the sea." He rolled his eyes, but there was no humor in it. Just resignation. He turned to the woman. "I'm really sorry. This isn't safe to run. I can switch you to another boat. Got one ready in 20 minutes. She frowned. "But we paid for this one." "I know," Kieran said gently. "And I'll make it right. No extra charge. And I'll throw in life jackets for the kids, plus a cooler full of ice. Fair?" She softened. "Yeah, thanks." As she walked away, Kieran leaned against the dock post, rubbing his temples. "Every time I ground a boat for safety, Dale gives me grief. Says I'm scaring off customers. But what's worse, losing a booking or someone getting hurt?" Leo didn't answer. He didn't need to. Later, while Kieran was elbow deep in transmission fluid, Leo wandered into the maintenance shed. It was a mess. Tools scattered, oil cans leaking, spare parts piled haphazardly. But tucked in a corner was a small workbench, neat and organized. On it sat a notebook filled with handwritten notes, torque specs, part numbers, dates of service. Next to it, a coffee-stained photo of a man in a grease-streaked apron standing beside a boat with O'Sullivan Marine painted on the hull. Kieran's dad. Probably that evening. After the last customer left, Kieran didn't go home. Instead, he dragged a tarp over a leaking deck seam on a center console, muttering about fiberglass resin and tomorrow's rain forecast. Leo stayed, holding the flashlight. "You don't have to do this," Kieran said after a while. "Neither do you," Leo replied. Kieran stopped, looked at him. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Not just fatigue, but curiosity. "Why are you here, really? You're older than most seasonal guys. You talk different. And you actually know your way around an engine." Leo met his gaze. "Maybe I'm just tired of seeing good people get used up." Kieran studied him for a long moment, then went back to smoothing the sealant. But he didn't push further. The next morning, disaster struck. A charter customer returned furious. Their boat had nearly sunk halfway through their trip. Water had been pouring into the cabin through a rotted transom. Kieran had reported that exact issue 2 weeks prior. Dale had ignored it. Now Dale was red-faced, blaming Kieran in front of everyone. "You're supposed to check these things." "What were you doing, napping?" Kieran stood very still. His voice was quiet but steady. "I logged it twice. I even took photos. You told me to stop making problems and just patch it with marine tape." Dale scoffed. "Excuses. You're lucky I don't dock your pay." Kieran didn't argue. He just turned and walked away, shoulders tight. Leo followed him to the far end of the dock where Kieran sat on the edge, staring at the water. He didn't cry. He just looked hollow. After a long silence, he said, "I can't quit. I need this job. But I can't keep watching people get put in danger because someone higher up doesn't care." Leo sat beside him. "Then maybe it's time someone higher up starts caring." Kieran looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Leo didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn keychain, a tiny brass propeller, the kind boatyard kids used to trade. He'd carried it for 20 years, a reminder of where he started. "Some people build things to last," he said quietly. "Others just build them to look good on paper. You're the first kind, kid. Don't let anyone make you forget that." Kieran took the keychain, turned it over in his palm. "Where'd you get this?" "From a man who taught me that a boat's only as strong as the hands that care for it." For the first time in days, Kieran almost smiled. That night, Leo lay awake in his motel room again. But this time it wasn't guilt that kept him up. It was clarity. He'd come to investigate losses, but what he'd found was far more urgent. A young man giving everything to a system that gave him nothing in return. And worse, risking lives in the process. He picked up his phone not to call corporate, but to text his assistant one simple instruction. "Pull all payroll and maintenance records for Port Haven. Send them to me by dawn. And book me a seat on the board call Monday." He wasn't just Leo anymore. He was a witness. And witnesses had a duty. Tomorrow he'd keep working beside Kieran. He'd keep listening. But soon, very soon, he'd stop hiding. Because some truths couldn't wait. And some people deserve better than silence. Rain started just after dawn. Steady, cold. The kind that soaks through your clothes before you even notice you're wet. Kieran was already on the dock, tarping over the center console with a torn plastic sheet he'd salvaged from a dumpster behind the bait shop. His hands moved fast, but his steps were slower today. Like every joint ached from yesterday's fight and the night before that. And the one before that. Leo found him wrestling with a loose grommet, rain dripping off the brim of his baseball cap. Without a word, he stepped in, held the tarp taut while Kieran hammered a rusted nail into the wood. They worked in silence, the kind that only comes when two people understand each other without needing to explain. After they finished, Kieran wiped his face with a soaked sleeve and let out a long breath. "Thanks, I swear this place is held together by spit and hope." "Hope's a good glue," Leo said. "But it shouldn't be the only one." Kieran gave a tired half-smile but didn't reply. He just headed toward the shed, limping more than usual. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and mildew. Kieran flipped on a flickering fluorescent light and started sorting through a bin of spark plugs. "Gotta prep the skiffs for tomorrow. Forecast says sun. People'll come." "You should rest that ankle," Leo said, leaning against a workbench. "Can't. If I don't get these ready, Dale'll say I'm slacking, again." He paused, then added quietly, "He's been watching me closer since yesterday." Leo nodded. He'd noticed, too. Dale lingering near the dock, arms crossed, eyes narrowed every time Kieran spoke to a customer. It wasn't oversight. It was intimidation. Later that morning, as Kieran was testing a bilge pump on a pontoon, Leo casually asked, "How'd you end up here anyway?" Kieran didn't look up. "My dad ran a small boatyard about 50 miles north. Fixed everything, sailboats, fishing trawlers, even old wooden runabouts. Taught me everything I know. He twisted a hose clamp with more force than needed. Then he got sick, real sick. We poured everything into his care, sold the yard, the house, even his old pickup. But it wasn't enough." He finally looked up, eyes distant. "After he passed, I bounced around for a while. Odd jobs, night shifts, sleeping in my car some nights. When I saw this posting, experienced Marine Tech wanted, I thought finally a break. But," he gestured around the crumbling shed, "this isn't what I signed up for." Leo felt the weight of that truth settle between them. This wasn't just about a broken bilge pump or a missing paycheck. It was about dignity, about being seen for your skill, not just your availability. That afternoon, a customer returned early, furious. "Your boat's got no power." The radio died, the lights flickered, and the GPS cut out halfway through. Kieran checked the battery terminals. Corroded, loose, clearly not maintained. He recognized the boat. It had been flagged for electrical issues 2 weeks ago. Dale had dismissed it. "I'm so sorry," Kieran said, voice calm despite the knot in his stomach. "Let me get you a full refund and a voucher for next time." The man grumbled but accepted. As he walked away, Dale appeared, face tight. What was that about? He snapped. Battery shot, Kieran said evenly. Wiring's frayed. I told you last month it needed a full electrical check. Dale stepped closer, voice low. You keep scaring people off and I'll find someone who knows how to keep their mouth shut. Kieran didn't flinch. I'd rather lose a booking than lose someone overboard. For a second, Dale looked like he'd say something worse. But then he just turned and walked off, muttering about ungrateful kids. Leo watched it all from the fuel dock. His jaw was clenched so tight it ached. That evening, after the last boat was secured and the rain had eased to a drizzle, Kieran sat on the edge of the dock, staring at the dark water. Leo joined him, handing over a thermos of hot coffee he'd bought from the gas station down the road. Kieran took it with a quiet thanks and wrapped his hands around it like it was the only warmth left in the world. You ever feel like you're shouting into the wind? He asked after a long silence. Yeah, Leo said, but sometimes the right person hears you, even if it takes a while. Kieran looked at him, really looked. You're not just some handyman, are you? Leo didn't answer right away. Instead, he said, what would you do if you had the chance to fix this place? Not just patch it, really fix it? Kieran thought for a moment. I'd start with honesty. No more ghost workers on the payroll. Real tools, not junk. Proper safety checks every boat, every time. And I'd pay people enough that they don't have to choose between rent and rest. He paused, then added, and I'd make sure the person in charge actually cared about the water, not just the wallet. Leo nodded slowly. Sounds like a good plan. The next morning, the storm returned with a vengeance. Wind howled off the bay, waves slapping hard against the pilings. Most marinas would have closed. But not this one. Dale had already taken deposits for a full day of charters. Kieran stood at the window of the office, watching the sky turn green-gray. This is bad. Real bad, Dale waved a hand. It's just rain. People paid. They'll go out. They shouldn't, Kieran said firmly. Visibility's near zero. Currents are strong. It's dangerous, Dale turned, eyes cold. You telling me how to run my business? I'm telling you it's not safe. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Dale smirked. Fine, cancel them yourself. And explain to corporate why we're losing $3,000 today. Kieran's face went pale. He knew what that meant, another black mark, another threat, another reason to be let go. But he walked out anyway. Called every customer. Apologized. Offered full refunds. Some yelled. Most understood. By noon, the marina was empty except for the two of them. And Leo, who'd stayed to help secure loose lines and tie down tarps. As the wind screamed through the rigging, Kieran sank onto a bench soaked and shaking, not from cold, but from the weight of standing alone. Leo sat beside him. You did the right thing. Feels like I just burned my last bridge, Kieran whispered. No, Leo said. You just built a new one. That night back in his motel room, Leo finally opened his laptop. He pulled up the payroll records his assistant had sent. Sure enough, 3 technicians listed, all with full salaries. But security footage from the past 2 months showed only Kieran working the dock. The others never showed up. Their time cards were signed by Dale. It was fraud. Plain and simple. He also reviewed the maintenance logs Kieran had kept. Meticulous, honest, ignored. Meanwhile, Dale had been submitting inflated invoices for parts and contract labor that never happened. Leo leaned back, running a hand over his face. This wasn't just poor management. It was theft from the company, yes, but more painfully from Kieran. From every customer who trusted them with their safety, from the very idea of honest work. He typed a short email to his legal team. Prepare termination and fraud documentation for Port Haven manager. Also draft a new field operations policy, co-developed with on-site staff. I'll be on-site Monday to oversee transition. Then he shut the laptop. He didn't sleep much that night. But for the first time since arriving, he felt calm. The storm outside had passed, and soon, so would the one inside the marina. Tomorrow he'd tell Kieran the truth, not as a CEO, not as a savior, but as someone who'd forgotten what mattered, and was lucky enough to be reminded by a young man who never stopped caring, even when no one was watching. Because real change didn't start in boardrooms. It started on wet docks with tired hands and stubborn hearts. And this time, Leo wouldn't let it go unnoticed. Monday morning arrived clear and bright like the storm had washed the sky clean. Birds called from the pines behind the marina, and the water sparkled under a gentle breeze. It felt like a new day because it was. Kieran showed up earlier than usual, moving stiffly but determined. He'd spent the weekend patching leaks, recharging dead batteries, and organizing the tool shed into something that almost looked professional. He didn't know why he bothered. After last week, he figured he'd be fired any minute. But old habits die hard, especially when your hands know the work better than your mind knows fear. Leo was already on the dock, tightening a loose cleat. He looked different today, stood straighter, shoulders back, like he'd shed a weight no one else could see. "Morning," Kieran said, voice rough from lack of sleep. "Morning," Leo replied. Then after a pause, "You got a minute?" Kieran nodded, wiping his hands on his jeans. They walked to the far end of the dock, away from the office, away from prying ears. Leo took a deep breath. "My name's not Leo." Kieran frowned but didn't interrupt. "My name is Elias Varga. I founded Coastal Horizon. This marina, this whole company, it's mine." Kieran froze. His eyes widened, then narrowed, searching for a joke, a trick, anything. But there was none. Just quiet honesty. You're the CEO?" He finally managed. "I am. And I came here because the numbers didn't make sense. But what I found wasn't a math problem. It was a human one." Kieran stared at the water, processing. Then he let out a shaky laugh. "So all this time, you were watching me?" "I was learning from you," Elias said gently. "You showed me what I'd forgotten, that this business isn't about profit margins. It's about people who trust us with their time, their safety, their memories on the water, and you've been honoring that, even when no one honored you." Kieran looked down, blinking fast. "I just didn't want anyone to get hurt." "You did more than that," Elias said. "You held this place together with nothing but grit and integrity. And that man in the office? He's been stealing. From the company, from you, from every customer who walked through that door." Before Kieran could respond, the marina gate opened. Two men in dark jackets stepped out of a sedan, corporate security sent quietly the night before. They walked straight to the office. Dale came out moments later, face red, shouting, "What is this? Who are these guys?" Elias walked toward him, calm but firm. "Dale, you're relieved of your duties effective immediately." "What? On whose authority?" "Mine." Elias handed him a sealed envelope. Inside is a formal notice of termination for payroll fraud, falsified records, and endangering customer safety. "Legal will contact you regarding restitution." Dale sputtered, tried to argue, but the security team gently guided him to his car. Within minutes, he was gone, taillights disappearing down the coastal road. Silence settled over the marina. Then slowly, the handful of part-time staff who'd arrived for their shifts gathered near the fuel dock, eyes wide, unsure what to do. Elias turned to them. "Everyone, please gather for a moment." They did, hesitant but curious. "My name is Elias Varga," he began. "Some of you may recognize it from the logo on the boats. I built this company because I believed in honest work and safe adventures on the water, but I let things slip. I trusted the wrong people, and because of that, one of you, Kieran, has been carrying this place on his back, alone." He looked at Kieran, who stood slightly apart, arms crossed, still processing everything. "That ends today," Elias continued. "Starting now, this marina will be run with transparency, fairness, and respect. We'll hire real staff, people who show up, work hard, and care. Wages will be raised to match the skill this job demands. Every boat will get proper maintenance, no more patches, no more shortcuts." A few workers exchanged glances. One woman whispered, "Does this mean we actually get the tools we asked for last year?" "Yes," Elias said firmly. "And more. But I can't do this alone. I need your help, your honesty, your ideas, your voices." Then he turned fully to Kieran. "And you've already earned more than a paycheck. You've earned a future." Kieran looked up, confused. Elias stepped closer. "I want to offer you something. Full tuition, plus living expenses for marine engineering school. You'll study during the week, and in the summers you'll work with our headquarters team, helping us redesign how we run every marina we own. Not from the top down, but from the ground up, the way you know it should be done." Kieran's breath caught. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. But only if you say yes." For a long moment, Kieran didn't speak. He looked at the boats, the dock, the shed where he'd spent nights fixing things no one else cared about. Then he looked at Elias, not as a CEO, but as someone who'd seen him, truly seen him when he felt invisible. I'd like that, he said, voice thick. But what about here? Who'll keep things running? You will, Elias said with a small smile. Just not alone. We'll bring in 2 new techs this week. Trained, paid fairly, reporting to you as interim lead until you finish your first semester. You'll train them. You'll set the standard. Kieran swallowed hard, then nodded. Okay, I'll do it. The small crowd of workers broke into quiet cheers. Not loud, just relieved, hopeful. Later that afternoon, Elias stayed to help Kieran prep the first new work order under the updated system. No more duct tape fixes, no more ignored logs, just clean, honest work. As they tightened a fresh impeller housing on a Yamaha outboard, Kieran finally asked, "Why did you really come here?" Most bosses would have just shut the place down. Elias paused, then said, "Because I remembered something my father told me when I started. If you lose touch with the people who do the real work, you've already lost the business." I almost did. But you reminded me what matters. Kieran smiled, a real one this time. Guess we both needed reminding. By sunset, the marina felt different, lighter, like the air itself had cleared. The new staff hadn't arrived yet, but the promise was there, in the organized tool wall. The printed safety checklist taped to the office window, the fresh life jacket stacked neatly by the dock. Elias didn't leave right away. He sat on the same bucket he and Kieran had shared for lunch weeks ago, watching the last golden light ripple across the water. Kieran joined him, holding 2 cold sodas. He handed one over. "Thanks," Elias said. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Kieran asked, "You really think I can help fix the whole company?" "I don't think," Elias said. "I know. Because you already fixed one piece of it, with nothing but your hands and your heart. That's the kind of change that lasts." Kieran took a long sip, then looked out at the bay. "My dad would have liked you. He sounds like he taught you well." "He did. Said the sea doesn't care about titles. Only truth," Elias nodded. "Then let's give it some." And as the first stars appeared above the mast lines, 2 men, one young, one older, both changed by the same dock, sat together not as boss and employee, but as partners in something better. Because sometimes, the most powerful revolutions begin not with a shout, but with a wrench, a worn-out pair of boots, and the quiet courage to do what's right, even when no one's watching. 6 months later, the Port Haven Marina didn't just look different, it felt different. The docks were freshly sanded and sealed. The rental office painted a clean sea blue, and the boats? They gleamed. Not showroom perfect, but cared for. The kind of shine that comes from regular oil changes, honest inspections, and hands that know every bolt by name. Kieran stood near slip 3, sleeves rolled up, showing a new apprentice how to test a fuel pressure regulator. He moved with more confidence now, still quiet, still humble, but no longer carrying the weight of the whole operation on his shoulders. The ankle had healed. The dark circles under his eyes had faded. And for the first time in years, he slept through the night. He wasn't full-time at the marina anymore. 3 days a week, he attended classes at the State Maritime College, studying marine systems and sustainable operations. The rest of the week, he split his time between Port Haven and the company's headquarters, where he'd helped design a new field operations manual, one built not from corporate theory, but from real dockside experience. The manual had already been rolled out to 12 other locations, and it worked. Customer complaints dropped by 60%. Staff retention doubled. Most importantly, safety incidents, once a quiet, unspoken problem, had vanished. Elias hadn't gone back to hiding in boardrooms. Once a month, without warning, he'd show up at a different marina in the network, sometimes as himself, sometimes in old work clothes, just to listen. He called it listening tours, but the staff had started calling them Elias Days, and they looked forward to them. Not because he brought gifts or speeches, but because he asked questions and actually waited for the answers. On this particular morning, he arrived early, parking his car behind the bait shop so no one would notice. He walked down the dock in worn jeans and a faded Coastal Horizon cap, coffee in hand. He didn't head straight to Kieran. Instead, he watched from a distance as the young man patiently guided the new hire, a nervous kid named Theo, through a carburetor rebuild. "You're rushing," Kieran said gently. "These parts are old. They need patience, not force. Theo nodded, slowed his hands. Sorry, I just don't want to mess it up. You won't, Kieran said. Not if you respect the machine. My dad used to say, a boat forgives mistakes, but only if you learn from them. Elias smiled into his coffee cup. That line wasn't in any manual. It was something deeper, something passed hand to hand like a well-worn wrench. Later, over lunch at the picnic table by the fuel dock, Kieran handed Elias a printed sheet. Final draft of the winter maintenance protocol. I added your suggestion about solar battery tenders. Elias scanned it. Clear, practical, written in plain language, no jargon, no fluff. This is good. Really good. It's just what works, Kieran said with a shrug. No point writing rules nobody can follow. That's the whole point, Elias said. Too many companies write policies for spreadsheets, not for people. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching a family load up a pontoon for an afternoon cruise. The kids laughed. The parents double-checked life jackets, real ones, not expired or frayed, and the boat started on the first try. Remember when that wouldn't have happened? Kieran asked quietly. Elias nodded. I do, and I won't forget it. Back at headquarters, Kieran's influence had rippled further than anyone expected. He'd pushed for a field voice seat on the operations committee, something unheard of before. Now every major decision about equipment, staffing, or safety included input from someone who actually turned wrenches for a living. Even the payroll system had changed. No more ghost employees. No more padded invoices. Every hour logged was verified by GPS check-ins and peer review. Fraud didn't just get punished, it became impossible. But the biggest change wasn't in the systems. It was in the culture. At Port Haven, staff meetings now started with what's working before what's broken. Mistakes were treated as lessons, not failures. And when someone went the extra mile, like staying late to help a stranded boater, they got thanked, not ignored. One afternoon, Elias found Kieran in the old maintenance shed, now transformed into a proper workshop. Clean floors, labeled bins, a whiteboard covered in diagrams. Kieran was sketching a new bilge alarm system, one that sent alerts directly to staff phones. You're thinking ahead, Elias said. Someone has to, Kieran replied with a small smile. Besides, if we can prevent one emergency, it's worth it. Elias leaned against the workbench. You know, when I first came here, I thought I was fixing a business problem. And now? Kieran asked, not looking up. Now I know I was fixing myself, Elias said. You reminded me that leadership isn't about control. It's about trust. About giving people the tools, the respect, and the space to do their best work. Kieran finally met his eyes. And you gave me a chance I didn't think I'd ever get. No, Elias corrected gently. You earned it. I just had the sense to see it. As the sun dipped low, painting the water in gold and rose, Elias didn't head back to his car right away. He stayed on the dock, watching Kieran show Theo how to properly coil a rope. Not just for looks, but so it doesn't tangle when you need it fast. The scene was simple. Ordinary, even. But to Elias, it was everything. This wasn't a turnaround story about profits or press releases. It was about a young man who refused to cut corners even when no one was watching. It was about a company that remembered its soul. And it was about the quiet truth that real change doesn't come from the top. It rises from the ground, one honest day's work at a time. Before he left, Elias stopped by the office and picked up a chipped Coastal Horizon mug from the shelf, same one he'd used months ago as Leo. He filled it with coffee from the new machine Kieran had insisted on installing. If we're asking people to work hard, they deserve decent coffee. He took one last look at the marina, the clean slips, the smiling staff, the boats ready for adventure, and felt something he hadn't in years. Peace, not because everything was perfect, but because it was real. And as he drove away, windows down, salt air filling the car, he knew he'd be back. Not as a CEO checking a box, but as a man who'd finally learned where his company's true compass pointed. Not toward balance sheets, but toward people like Kieran, steady, skilled, and stubbornly kind, who kept the whole thing afloat, one honest repair at a time.